Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, my muñaños. This is Jesus, and this is a new Jesus Gaming a Podcast episode. And this is Wednesday, 27th February 2024. And it is the end of April, and it is the end of the month. But quite frankly, it's not only the end of the month of the second month of the 2024, it's actually the last month of Jim Ryan as current Sony Interactive Entertainment or the parent company of PlayStation, or being the CEO of the parent company of PlayStation. And I wanted to dedicate this episode highlighting some of the good, some of the bad, and some of the ugly within his tenure as CEO of PlayStation, and I want to give you some preview. Jim Ryan didn't start just a while ago, like in short term. He actually is a Sony veteran that happens to land the job of leading one of Sony's most successful business, one that back in 1995 it wasn't even foreseeable that gaming will become one of the most important business for Sony as a Japanese electronic conglomerate, one of the first company that Japan could produce out of the Second World War, currently being led up by the gaming industry. And of course, since 2019, it has been a roller coaster for Mr. Jim Ryan. So without further ado, let's go. Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity for bringing you another gaming podcast episode, Jesus Gaming and Podcast. And I want to make something clear. This episode is not about doing a biography of Jim Ryan. I think that we have to focus on what this channel is about, gaming, video games, and basically, like I said, this will be the good, the bad, and the ugly behind the career of Jim Ryan as part of PlayStation, as CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, the parent company of PlayStation. So I think that it's fair to start with maybe I wanted to start from good, bad, and ugly, but I think that I should close a little more positive this episode. So let's start backwards. I think that we have to start with the ugly, the bad, and the good so we can close this episode in a more positive way. So let's start with the ugly parts. And I think that his tenure back in last year, 2023 and 2022, was mainly a challenge because PlayStation was so against the purchase of Activision Blizzard King by Microsoft that PlayStation felt that it was a dangerous situation. It was uncharted waters where Microsoft could land one of the biggest gaming conglomerate that includes the biggest third-party franchise for PlayStation, which is Call of Duty, and ended up being in court where the FTC and not PlayStation, obviously, but PlayStation was a big helper, advocate, whatever you want to call it, of the Federal Trade Commission trying to avoid legally that Microsoft could buy Activision Blizzard King, regardless ABK wanted to be bought. And pretty much Jim Ryan's actions included a lot of lobbying in Washington, D.C. It included a lot of internal campaigns within the industry and yes, some other movement that pretty much gave the situation or the perception that PlayStation was really in high alert about this purchase. I think one of the ugly thing is precisely the lobbying in the Congress, and actually the lobbying backfired because the very same lawmakers that Jim Ryan tried to appeal for having the help that PlayStation needed as a help to avoid Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard King issued an open letter, and that open letter didn't name Jim Ryan specifically. It did name the parent company of PlayStation and the parent company of the parent company of PlayStation, Sony itself as Sony Corporation. I think is the official name of Sony as a enterprise conglomerate, and pretty much the lawmakers made the statement that they believe that Sony is on the wrong side of this, and it was actually PlayStation false. Xbox wasn't a success in Japan, which is not a lie. It's a factual thing that Xbox hasn't really dived in or penetrated completely as Microsoft will want since 2001 in the gaming industry on the gaming market of Japan. And I think that letter, it could have been just a big blow in the morale within the PlayStation and the executive part or executive members and the hierarchy of the high big guys in Sony. I think that is one of the most embarrassing moments of Jim Ryan as a CEO, where some of his plans to actually fight Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard did backfire, and there wasn't much that he could do about it. Related to that, before jumping to the next ugly part, Jim Ryan finally having PlayStation to accept the deal of a 10 years agreement that Microsoft compromised on having Call of Duty still directly available for PlayStation, one of the most defeats in the corporate story of PlayStation and the corporate story of Jim Ryan. Unfortunately, another ugly aspect within Jim Ryan's tenure since 2019, headlining the Sony Interactive Entertainment, is actually advocating for the price increase that we are currently seeing in this gaming generation, especially with the PlayStation 5. While it's not the first time that games were over the $70 point or more suggested retail price, pandemic, inflation, whatever you want to name the current economical situation that we are facing, led the gaming industry to unfortunately sink the $70 most suggested retail price for any new game, mainly AAA game or games that were filled with a complete content. And I think that thing pretty much wasn't speaking in pro consumer. It was just Jim Ryan go full corporate Sony businessman that just wanted to ensure and be like a hero for shareholders and stockholders of Sony, instead of the people that the company should really think about is consumers, the gamers, the people that end paying the money. And I believe that the final ugly that I will name officially was in the time when Jim Ryan attacked gaming history, retro gamers, and gaming preservation. And I quote, all PlayStation 1s and PlayStation 2 games look ancient. Like, why will anybody play this? I get that you're defending current generation. Back then it was PlayStation 4 and pretty much preparing the environment for the PlayStation 5, but attacking your most dedicated players, because retro gamers are dedicated gamers. I mean, I do believe that retro gamers are not having this respect and I will count myself a retro gamer. As you can see in the background, if you're seeing this on YouTube, these are my gaming collection that includes back to PlayStation 1. And I do believe that retro gamers should be respected, and mainly because we can show the new generations of gamers how things fared in the gaming scenery. And I think that having a tone deaf and the entitlement to attack why people choose to still play in PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 to this day, regardless of whatever the current system of the current generation is, I think that that's one of the most daring things that you can do if you are practically leading a company that is the leader in the gaming industry. The less you're going to do is to segregate, and not only to segregate a niche within a niche. You don't attack gamers at any point, regardless if the business requires so, because if the business requires so, then you're not worthy to be in the gaming industry at all. All right, we are improving now. Instead of ugly, we go with my point of view of the three bad things about Jim Ryan's tenure as CEO of PlayStation, Sony Interactive Entertainment. And I think that this game as a service and live services focus that started, I think that 2 years ago when it was revealed in summer of 2022 in the Sony Investors Conference. Not the conference that is go quarterly. I think it's called the Investor Days, where it's like a Super Bowl, World Series, or WrestleMania of Sony's and their investors. where they revealed that for PlayStation size, the PlayStation Studios, or the houses of first party gaming studios for PlayStation, will be having kind of researching in doing live services game. And it was later revealed that Sony had a pipeline of 12 games in development, including the now canceled Last of Us multiplayer game that was supposed to be The Last of Us 2, a new mode, but instead it was just moved as a whole package itself outside of both The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2, or The Last of Us Part 2. And I think that this kind of a focus was just about money milking that went wrong because most of the projects are either in the reassessment or has been canceled. Like I said, The Last of Us multiplayer was kind of the first collateral of this failed focus that Sony has for PlayStation. Which brings us to the second point of the bad parts of Jim Ryan's tenure. And I think it's related to one point of the ugly part, is that Jim Ryan shows himself more like a corporate guy or company goes first instead of consumer or fandom. Being, and I think I'm gonna be flash forwarding a good point about Jim Ryan, and it is undeniable that working in the business, any business, including a company that is actually a conglomerate. Conglomerate is a company that hosts many companies and many businesses. Of course, that you have to think about being money driven, but there are times that you need to go in the consumer level regardless of things. And I think that Jim Ryan's really failed on being this kind of a pro gamer that he was supposed to be, being heading a company like Sony Interactive Entertainment, PlayStation. I think from now until the end of the episode, I'm just going to call PlayStation the company, and Jim Ryan, CEO of PlayStation. Being a CEO of a company like PlayStation, you need to go down with how the consumer feel, how the gamer, how the one person that have you receive incomes, revenue, whatever you want to call, they give you money, and their opinion also count. Jim Ryan, I think that is this kind of a executive that thinks or believe what people should need instead of what people want. And I think that he's on the mentality that the company should not be complacent to consumer. I have seen this strategy before, enforcing your customer, or I wanted to avoid the sheep and the shepherds example, but I don't find a best example, so let's go with it. So many companies and many executives feels that the shepherd and the sheep guides their sheep on where they should eat the grass and where they should rest and where they should stay for sleeping. And I associate it with the terms on companies trying to educate their customers to be a best customer, or how a customer should have their needs and how they have to be answered. And I think that that's kind of a thing that doesn't work in the gaming industry, in my opinion. I think one of the bad thing about Jim Ryan's tenure as PlayStation CEO has to do with the cross-playing capacity of games within PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and Nintendo Switch, or whatever you want to call that, how you want to vary that cross-play relationship within games. I think that my big point on the bad parts of Jim Ryan's PlayStation CEO tenure is the PlayStation handling and initial resistance of cross-playing. It was revealed in both the preliminary injunction the FTC wanted to avoid Microsoft from buying ABK, and the lawsuit that Google responded to. Epic Games have a special deal with Epic Games about allowing Fortnite's crossplay with Xbox and Nintendo Switch, because Sony was afraid that any DLC bought elsewhere, Sony had to obviously allow Epic Games to recognize it or allow it to be in play, but PlayStation doesn't see that DLC purchase or income as part of PlayStation, and it was a silly resistance. It was so silly that PlayStation needed to wait that the industry really move it to not only crossplay but cross-platform, which is the part that you buy something or a DLC in one platform, it has to appear on the other, and of course the almighty cross-save that allows you to continue your game from one system to another. I think that PlayStation really tried to kill crossplay, in my opinion, back in 2017, then going forward. And it just sad that it had to take the pandemic to really PlayStation realize that cross-playing, cross-platform, and cross-saving was just undeniable, and it was inevitable at the end. And the pandemic just proved that further, that it was undeniable, inevitable, and it's here to stay. And thank goodness it's here to stay. And with that, it's not all bad or ugly with Jim Ryan as CEO of PlayStation. And one can guess why Jim Ryan decided to next month leave his post or his position as PlayStation CEO. But no, it doesn't have necessarily or completely to do with the ugly and the bad parts that I just mentioned. It's because he's actually a Sony veteran. He didn't start just in 2019 as the CEO of PlayStation, and that's one of the good things about the tenure of Jim Ryan, because his full tenure on Sony dates back from the middle 90s, and that's the pretty much reason he reveals that why he's leaving PlayStation and Sony completely. Practically he's a European resident, or more specifically because United Kingdom is now out of the European zone. So Jim Ryan is a British citizen that has to constantly travel to America and Japan, because obviously Japan is the home of Sony, and one of the biggest bastion of Sony as a conglomerate is in America, in the United States. So imagine being traveling in 3 continents weekly for the last 30 plus years, and more importantly, in the since 2019, maybe duplicating that traveling schedule. I think that it took a toll. Basically, it took a toll, and humanly, it's possible that Jim Ryan just had enough of so much responsibility, going in 3 continents almost weekly or maybe monthly in the best scenario. But I think that the whole ABK, Activision Blizzard King saga, the backfiring that I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think that took a toll on him. I mean, you can't deny 30 plus year tenures in a company and leading some of Sony's most successful products, businesses, and ending your career with PlayStation, one of the most important business today for Sony, and leader in Sony Interactive Entertainment and the PlayStation Studios. I think that's one of the good things about Jim Ryan's tenure as CEO of PlayStation Company, because that goes to point number 2. Actually, this was a point apart from another, but I think I'm gonna merge it into one point. Under Ryan's leadership, PlayStation 5 outpaced the sales of PlayStation 4 in the 3 years since the PlayStation 5 launch, selling more than 50 million units in the 3 years that already the PlayStation 5 is currently is in this new gaming generation. And that goes because it's an effective management. Yeah, there's some bad and ugly parts of being corporate-centric guys, but I had to give it to him. This is the positive parts of him being pro company, because he has shown during the years that he has some effective management despite all the controversies, because he left the business in strong position with record hardware sales, steady subscriber numbers for PS Plus, and a strong slate of first-party studio. Yes, I know that this episode goes live with the recent news that the PlayStation business is having a layoff, with the workforce being reduced by 8%, or in the size of PlayStation, it means like 900 jobs being cut. But unfortunately, that's part of the culture of management at big companies. There are some headwinds your company as a flagship. You need to respond on the economic state and the environment within the marketing world. So yeah, this is the ugly part of being a corporation, that you need to make tough decisions. And I think that that's pretty much another good point about Jim Ryan's as CEO of PlayStation, is having to make difficult decisions, and maybe some backfires, some are just bad, but in the end might be justified, and also the good days and the good results. And the main good aspect about him leaving PlayStation, in my opinion, is to no further damaging the PlayStation images in the general gaming community. Yes, there are pro PlayStation fans that justify anything about PlayStation, but there are these, and I'm going to include myself here, there are the gamers that just play video games. I can have the Nintendo Switch. I can have the Nintendo Game Boy. I can have the PlayStation 5. I got my Xbox 360 here. This is the PlayStation 5. Behind this, I had the Xbox 360. I got here the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation 4, and the Xbox One S. I'm in the process of buying myself the Xbox Series X. So the point that I'm going is that gaming shouldn't be about being pro-platform. And being pro-platform is what allows you to better and further enjoy gaming with different perspective, different point of views. Why I'm saying that? Because I believe that Jim Ryan's choosing to leave PlayStation at this time, where there's some uncertainty because of economics, the world, marketing, etc., etc., etc. I think that he's avoiding more bad press for PlayStation at all, the public perception of PlayStation, especially for the non-pro PlayStation fans. And another thing, and I think that it is important, is that he's trying to keep his legacy not being tainted, not being ruined by the Activision Blizzard King fallout for PlayStation or the PlayStation point of view of the Microsoft purchase of ABKs, the momentum that might be slowing down for PlayStation. And I do believe that the gaming itself as a market is having like a recess, because some things are not functioning, especially games as a service and live services for gaming are not going to cut it anymore. And I think that avoiding leading PlayStation, especially when PlayStation have those days of having misses and mishaps, I think that he's trying to protect his legacy as a key person for Sony itself. And I do understand that in a personal point of view, and in the experience that I have working with companies and stockholders and managers and executives. If that is the mentality of Jim Ryan trying to preserve his legacy as a businessman or a key person that used to work with Sony, I think that I do understand how he feels. I do understand why this could be a part of the decision. This is just me speculating. Of course, I don't have the data that this is a fact. But I want to think that Jim Ryan is trying to protect his legacy, including from PlayStation itself. So I think that's one good point about Jim Ryan as CEO of PlayStation. If PlayStation is going to a wrong direction, that maybe they can steer it out, or there's a point of no return, I think that Jim Ryan just doesn't want to be part of it. Let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts about all these points about the ugly, the bad, and the good about Jim Ryan's tenure as PlayStation CEO? Do you have your own list? Share it right in the comments. Remember to hit the subscribe, like, and the notification bell so you can be aware for everything gaming content, including another episode for Jesus Gaming and Podcast. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to bring you another gaming podcast episode. Be aware that I'm going to be uploading more gaming content also on shorts. This was Jesus from Jesus Gaming and Podcast. Have a good one, health and success. See you later.